you're just going to be on social media complaining all day, as I was saying, right? If you want to actually make a difference, you got to start going to things, start knocking on doors for candidates, start, shifting your kind of direction from just planning to actually doing.
Hi, I'm Heidi Beidinger.
And I'm Stephanie Wilson.
And welcome to What the Gerrymander, brought to you by Hoosier Victory Alliance, also known as HVA. I'm a former candidate for State House and current member of the St. Joseph County Board of Health.
And I'm a co-founder of Hoosier Victory Alliance, which is trying to build political power for pro-democracy forces in Indiana. I'm a historian and communications expert, and I specialized in values-based messaging and storytelling.
What the Gerrymander is all about reclaiming and rebuilding our collective political power in a MAGA-captured state. On this podcast, we'll be talking with people who are working to build our political power here in Indiana and across this country. We're here to help galvanize you, our listeners, to action, give you ideas on how to contribute your time, money, and talents, and especially to inspire hope that when we work together, we can change the course of our future.
We're launching Blue Indiana, an organization that will crowdfund money for Democratic candidates to contest every seat in the state legislature. In the last election in Indiana, there were 31 uncontested House seats and 8 uncontested Senate seats. As you listen, please consider becoming a member and giving a recurring donation.
Today, we spoke with Nick Roberts, college student, Democratic nominee for Indianapolis City Council District 4, and member of the all-important Gen Z. He has been involved in politics for years, which has included much work during 2021's redistricting around the state. His campaign is focusing on infrastructure, public safety, and mental health, and he speaks very passionately about these 3 areas. Nick is an energetic, compelling young candidate who will knock your socks off. You're going to really enjoy this one. Hello, Nick, and welcome to What the Gerrymander. Congratulations on your candidacy for City Council, where you're the only Dem in your district race for the primary.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We'll go way into it, but it's going amazing so far. And I just want to thank you both, Stephanie and Heidi, for having me on. I've known you both for a little bit now, and I'm so appreciative for all the work you guys do up in northern Indiana, South Bend area to make a difference. And it's tough being in the red states, but we got to fight back and fight hard. And it starts on the local level, as you both know. And we're so appreciative to have the platform to come on and talk about my candidacy.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm already loving your energy, Nick. This is going to be a great conversation, and I know our listeners are going to love this. So let's kick it off. I'm so curious to hear about your journey. You're currently a college student and you're running for city council. That's pretty unusual. And I know this isn't your first gig into Indiana politics. I wonder, so a couple of questions. So share with us how the heck you got here, and then your why. What brings you to this moment? What brings you to do this work? And then share with us some of your core values.
Yeah, so when I got started in the whole political world, it was, as many people had, it was an outrage about a lot of the national politics that were happening. I was 16 years old, sitting in my grandmother's living room, furious about Trump getting elected. Say what you will about the whole thing, I was not a fan personally, and I needed to find an outlet for it, right? My family is full of people that would say are doers, not talkers. And they were like, you should just apply for some internships, get involved. So the next day I applied for some internships at the Marion County Democratic Party, the State Democratic Party. I accepted the internship at the Marion County Democratic Party. So at 16, I did all that. I became the vice president of the local Democrats club. I started working on campaigns like crazy. And that was really where I found my passion, is not only is there the national stuff that's important, but you can really make the difference on the local level, as I said earlier, right? And, this is where really the campaigning, you're talking to just average people, when I out knocking on doors, it's people I, went to high school with, it's people that I see at different clubs in the city, right? So it's important to have those local connections. And from there, I started just working on more and more campaigns, building it up. And then this city council spot popped up. And again, I've been really involved in the community too. So I am a student at IUPUI downtown, but I also have a job at the trustee's office here in Lawrence Township. I'm the director of community relations there, which is an awesome job, really involved in the community with that. And then I also have my own data analytics LLC too. So I have my own small business on the side too that I work on. So I've got a lot of hats I wear, different things. I'm also the president now of the Lawrence Township Democrats. So I keep very, very busy with tons of different things. So it's, the campaigning is just, another thing for me to do. But honestly, again, really the number one thing when I'm out in the community talking to people is people just want somebody that's normal. They want somebody that is a part of the community. They want somebody that's a hard worker. They want somebody who, when they call the city council to, report a pothole or whatever, they want somebody that can, follow through on that, right, and help them out with it. So that's my promise is I'll work as hard as possible for anybody. And that's, why I think the beauty of local politics is so great is the fact that, you really can get things done, and there's Democrats and Republicans you'll have to work with, and you have to make that happen. And, my district is pretty purple, and that's really been the response I've gotten is, I've had plenty of Republicans that have been willing to vote for me that have told me that it's like, you know what, again, fixing potholes and, picking up calls is not a partisan issue. And I think that really goes a long way with people. So that's the campaign side. As for my why, honestly, I'm a firm believer in if you want to make a difference, go do it. It's easy for people to be on Twitter. I'm big on I love Twitter. I'm on there all the time, right? But it's one thing to be on Twitter and always be complaining. It's another thing to take action. On some level, when you're just being a keyboard warrior 24/7, you're not really accomplishing anything, You have to actually take action. And I think local politics is the perfect outlet for that. I truly am also a firm believer in the fact that when we look at the divisive national politics, it's easy to get lost in the cynicism and get lost in the tribalism and the divisiveness. But if we want to rebuild that starts on the local level. It starts by reaching out to your neighbor. I have a MAGA flag across the street from me, and he and I have a great relationship, right? But that's because I just have that relationship with him where he and I are friendly, and we'll work as hard for him as I will work hard for anybody. So that's been kind of my psychology on that. As for the why in terms of issues, there's a few that are important to me. Infrastructure is number one. The roads in Indianapolis are not as sufficient as they should be, obviously. Number two, public safety. We need to make sure everyone feels safe in Indianapolis. And then third, mental health. Mental health is a really big issue for me as well, which I can get into more if you're curious. But it's a big issue for so many people. And, I think it's an issue that affects a lot of people, veterans, homelessness, the education system, the criminal justice system, right? So it's widespread. And those are really my three big ones right now that I'm really focusing on. And I've heard just an overwhelmingly positive response when I've brought up those three issues in the community, because those are the same issues people bring up to me as well.
Okay. That was just like a fabulous answer. What seemed originally like a very simple question. And I feel like I've got a number of places that I want to pivot from. But, I'm a faculty member at Notre Dame, and I work with our student clubs and so forth. And I got to say that oftentimes they're very much focused on the national issues and national politics. Nick, I wonder if you could say something more about what advice would you give me in terms of trying to engage college students who are very focused on the national politics and less on the local. And when we've tried to engage them on the local, we don't get a lot of engagement. So I guess, are there any nuggets you can share with us in terms of what could be our strategy in terms of improving student engagement on that local level?
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I've had the same experience. It's challenging to get people to focus on the not so sexy issues, right? But there's exciting stuff happening at a local level. And the way I think of it is, my district is not downtown. My district is on the northeast corner of the county, right by Fishers, right? In the Castleton and Geist areas, which are pretty well-off areas, right? But when I think of the projects that are worked on in the city council, these are things that will have a huge impact on the city for not just a 5-year, in national politics, a lot of the issues come and go. They really just kind of, people think it's always the end-all be-all, but again, these sort of things are very, they come and go. But for local politics, the projects that you work on now might take 10, 20 years, but they can transform an entire city, a neighborhood, a community, right? And really, even though I do have an optimism on local politics, I don't have for national politics as much sometimes, there is just as much negativity on a local level that we need to combat too. You'll have your equivalents of Marjorie Taylor Greens and Trumps that maybe excite people about the national, I hate to say it, but I think a lot of people get excited about the national politics because what I would say are the characters, the people that are the, they're almost like TV personalities.
Yeah,
I mean, look at George Santos, people are not interested in George Santos because of the policy ramifications of George Santos. They're interested in George Santos because he's a freaking train wreck, right? And I mean, there's some train wrecks on local political level too. But if you're interested in the policy, which I think is not really most people's forethought, but it is the most important part of government and what it should be, right? That's where local politics can really make the difference, Talk to anybody in local government. They'll tell you about how, again, it's not the flashy stuff, but you really make a difference when you're in the local politics. And if people want to make a difference, young people, I always recommend them start going to things, start, meeting people. It's kind of awkward when you're the only young person at an event. I mean, I've been at events I was at a community meeting on Monday, and I think I was the youngest person there by 50 years, right? Like, it happens all the time for me,
right.
But you just kind of have to get over it. But honestly, people love it when there's young people at things. Like, they really do. And I've had so many people that I consider mentors that have really guided me up through it, that if you can find people, and it might be also tougher at Notre Dame too, because Notre Dame has a lot of out-of-state students, right? And I think part of the reason I'm so invested in my area is I grew up here. My family's lived here 4 generations. I live here now. I live here my entire life, right? So I'm invested in this community. It's not like I'm going off to college, living there for 2 years, then running for office, right? It's something I've been here for my entire life, right? So I think it might be tougher at Notre Dame too. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. But I think if people have that local kind of investment, it really goes a long way.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, Nick, is that really what I'd need to do is just invite you to Notre Dame's campus so that you can then talk to the student body so they can then get as excited about local politics as you are.
After the election. I will after the election. I promise I will after the election. I'm a little busy before then, but I can do it after.
My daughter is on the IU Bloomington campus, and she talks about the lack of engagement and even hearing what's happening, right? So it's not as widespread, and perhaps it's not our culture here in Indiana, the Gen Z, and for our for our college campuses. Do you find that? Is that true? Is that an accurate observation?
Yeah, I think it's totally true. The fact that I don't want to put the blame on Gen Z or millennials, because I think it's kind of just a straight line down that, I grew up in the internet age, right? I grew up in the pandemic generation too, obviously, right? It's easy for me if I'd want to just sit on my computer and TV all day, and I can be as invested in politics by just being on the internet as I could be in person, but it's a different kind of involvement, right? And I tell people it's on some level, it's very surface level. If you're just going to be on social media complaining all day, as I was saying, right? If you want to actually make a difference, you got to start going to things, start knocking on doors for candidates, start, shifting your kind of direction from just, complaining to actually doing. And it's hard. And I think after the pandemic too, and I don't want to blame everything on the pandemic, because I think a lot of these trends were accelerating before then, but I think there's less reason now for people that are our age to have to get involved with in-person clubs and things when, it's easy for us just to be on our phones all day and just have as much communication there. And it's uncomfortable. It's kind of putting outside your comfort zone to go to a new thing unless you have somebody that's kind of bringing you in, right? So
of course
it's tough, but I think it's kind of just got to just dive right in and just go for it. And I think it's much more fulfilling to actually be involved on an in-person level rather than just an internet level.
And I think that we probably have to do a better job of talking about these 2 different methods of involvement that you're describing, right? There's the internet involvement, engaging with Twitter, which yields virtually nothing except that you get that emotional outlet, versus the actual doing.
And I do it a lot. Like, I have no problem with it.
I mean, we all did it.
You got to do both, though. You got to do
both.
Right.
We all did it. And we still all continue to do it. No doubt about it. But I think the point, though, about being much clearer that there are these 2 different ways to be involved, right? And one gets you one thing, right? And it tends to get you more information or blow some steam off. But the other way of authentic engagement in the local community or with a state candidate, whatever that might be, that's authentic engagement. So, and I don't know that we've actually gone that far to talk like that with our college students, that these are 2 different things. So, don't fool yourself into thinking that engaging on Twitter is somehow engagement, right? So maybe we need to do a better job of having those conversations. And I do think, Nick, bringing you to campus would also be a really helpful thing. So they can see it in action, right? Because they could imagine themselves being you, right? I mean, we have spoken to students who are like, I want to run for office one day. Well, wouldn't it be amazing to bring somebody like yourself, full of enthusiasm, charisma, and ideas? They would imagine themselves, and many of them couldn't even imagine doing it this young. Which, of course, leads me to another question. And that is, because you are a full-time college student, how in the world are you balancing? And then didn't you say you're the president of the county party? You have your
Township.
Thank you. And you have your LLC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So talk a second about how the heck you keep all of this straight. Where's the time management? Do you have people helping you? What's that look like?
I mean, I'm really my own campaign manager. Like, that's what's so great is I have experience, right? So for me, I'm doing it all myself. But honestly, I just have a lot of energy and I just go for it. And, it's been just a really positive experience. And, thankfully my classes are all online. I did in person the last few semesters since the pandemic, but I'm doing this semester all online so I don't have to commute to campus half an hour every day, right? Thankfully my LLC, it's again, data analytics. I do a lot of mapping, data visualization stuff, but I'm putting that kind of on hold. I'm still doing work when I can, but it's honestly not really a top priority right now. But that's kind of what I view my long-term career path to be most likely is making that kind of a full-time thing. So I've got all that, but, people tell me all the time, or not all the time actually, but a couple of people have told me, Nick, I'm supporting you, obviously. I think it's great, but I think you just need to take a second just to breathe sometimes and just, be just like a normal young adult for a minute. Right. And I hear them, but I just it's so fascinating to me and so important. And there's so many good things to do and so much work that needs to be done that that's not really been my perspective. Like we're in such a difficult point for our politics locally and federally that we have to make things happen and get things done. And, and the bigger point for that, there's never a perfect time, right? If I waited 5 or 10 years, by then I might have, wife and kid or whatever, right? And that, and in many ways that's better on paper, because I'd be a little bit older and I'd have, not school and all this stuff, right? But I'd have a wife and kids, right? Like there's never a perfect time to run for office. And in all honesty, in many ways, this is the perfect time for me to do it too, just because there's so much energy right now. And, those commitments are massive. And anybody that's worked on a campaign that has young kids or something can tell you that it's a huge challenge, right? So, the timing is never perfect, but I'm glad to do it. And for your Notre Dame students or anybody else, I don't think you should just necessarily want to run for office for the sake of running for office. You need a why, obviously, but more importantly on that too, you need to kind of build up a little, not just in terms of politics. Like people think about getting involved in politics as in going to political events, fundraisers, all that, right? Get involved in the community too. Start going to different events, trying to be on boards and things, right? That's really where you make the difference and you meet the people that are, that can go a long way. So, but if you've done that for a couple of years and you've been involved with all that and you still want to follow through with it, then you can follow through. But it's a long-term process that, a lot of it's about timing too. I had a great relationship with the incumbent. He had great things to say and it's all kind of worked out, right? So you can't just go into these ideas, deciding to run for office and go for some random thing. Right. A lot of it's timing. A lot of it is kind of putting in the foundations. That way you have the community support that helps you out. Well,
and would you also say that to make that decision, it's never 100%, right? You're never just like totally 100% sure that this is the right. It's like, it's more like you just have to have more than 50% pushing you in that direction. And that part of it is in fact a leap of faith, right? In some degree, you've put in the work and everything and you're like, you know what, in my gut, I can't explain it in any other way, but in my gut and in my heart, I know I need to go in this direction. At least that's how I ended up making the decision to do it.
Sounds to me, Nick, like this is like your passion. And I think one of the things that, as people are listening, thinking about how they want to make a difference in the world, seeing that, you don't want to put it off for for very pragmatic reasons, but also because this is the thing you most want to be doing in your life right now. And I think the pandemic really changed a lot of fundamental things about people and their engagement. So I wonder, you mentioned that your peers have a lot of reluctance to go to things in person unless they are brought there. It's just like, well, would you ever talk on the phone if you could text? I mean, right? So how do you think about bringing people your age in, like reaching out more personally and convincing them that it's actually okay to have in-person interaction?
Yeah, and I think the most effective way, far and away, for anything in politics and anything in the world is a human-to-human relationship that brings them in, right? I can be an incredibly engaged young person that wants to go to Democratic Party events, but if I'm just scrolling on Instagram and I see Democrats of Notre Dame event, right, I probably won't go to it unless I have somebody to come with. Like people, a lot, and this is the difference. Is like I am always outside of my comfort zone in a great way. I think like once you're outside of your comfort zone so much, kind of liberates you to kind of have a feeling where it doesn't really matter anymore, right? But I think to most people, they kind of have a comfort zone that it's best to have somebody that's from the organization reach out to them. Relational organizing is the most effective way of going about it. So if I was on the board of the Notre Dame College Democrats and I wanted to expand my organization, I wouldn't just try and rely on posting things on Instagram and having people come out, right? I would try and, reach out to people that I know directly and then bring people they know too, right? And that's really where I think, the stop is for some people is I think people are scared of going to these events and feeling like they don't know anybody, then just leaving. And then, there's a million people that, and this is why I tell people as well, is that, I've been involved now in politics for 7 years now, right? And that 7 years, I've seen so many waves of people come and go in politics. And I think the most kind of cyclical in that way is young people, right? Because they want to enter on one campaign and kind of get a feel of it, and then they just leave after a campaign, right? Because it's easy to go to one event or work on one campaign and then kind of fold out because for whatever reason, you just don't really find your footing in it, right? But if you really are dedicated to it, you just gotta stick with it. It's not going to be easy, but you just have to stay with it. And once you start going to more and more things, you'll know more and more people. It'll become easier and easier. And I think that's another problem too, is the fact that a lot of the traditional methods of local politics are going to fundraisers, being on phone calls, sending emails to people in the neighborhood associations, right? Those are not very typical things for people that are 22, like I am, to be doing with much of their time, right? People dread phone calls. They dread fancy events. They dread these long meetings, right? That's the important stuff to do. And I think it sounds intimidating maybe on the surface to do a lot of those things, but once you start going to them, you'll take an appreciation for them. And I mean, I'm thankful I've been to all these things too. And one of also the beauties of local politics, I think, is the fact that if you're going to all these things, not only do you have involvement and you have, a long-term perspective on your area, but you also start knowing a ton about everything in the area. Like it's just cool to be able to drive any direction I can from go to my house and be able to anecdotally say, oh, a new project's going on here, or I know the people living on that street. They're really nice people. Like it's great to have that community feel. It gives you a whole nother appreciation for everything going on in your area.
That sounds really awesome. And it kind of leads to my next question, which is, you get all of your information on Twitter, but also through, all these boards and all of this interaction that you are doing. If we take, 5 steps back and look at it sort of as a bigger phenomenon, how do you think that your peers where are they getting their information? What is the most motivating thing that they see? Like for people who aren't you, how, everyone opines on how you get Gen Z motivated, but where are people getting their information from, and what is the best way beyond dragging someone to an event to reach people your age?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question right there, right? And I think fundamentally it's very different. First and foremost, people are not watching TV to get their news, obviously. Number one by far is social media. I mean, I'm not saying this based on academic studies or anything, but just anecdotally based on my conversations with people. First and foremost, social media, and that information obviously is flawed. Maybe podcasts and maybe like that. That's honestly but word of mouth probably up there too. People often, when they look at how low Gen Z turnout is, I think they like to blame it on people that intentionally are not voting. But honestly, I find a lot of it is just people that don't know when, where, who, how to vote, right? If I'm on Instagram, if I was to unfollow the, people that I know that are political, and I was just on like the random people I knew from high school and stuff, I don't think I would get any information about midterms. Thankfully I follow tons of political people. So when the deadline's to register to vote, everybody I know posts about registering to vote, right? But for the average people, that's just not their priority, right? And the parents aren't enforcing it, and the kids, the schools aren't really doing a great job. And we also think about, we often think about everybody under the lens, because a lot of the people we interact with that are my age are in college, right? But half of Indiana 18-year-olds are in college, right? 19, 20-year-olds, right? And that's really the demographic we need to hit too. And those are even more apathetic from my experience and, plugged out from all the political stuff, right? If somebody's got Notre Dame, you might think they're not plugged into politics, but I can guarantee the average Notre Dame student is much more plugged into politics than the average 19-year-old living in rural Indiana that, is probably just not, having any interaction with any kind of political information, right? So we have fun ways of reaching out to them. I think the reality is it's very tough, and honestly, that's where I think relational organizing is important, having people that are local community ambassadors who can reach out to different communities, I think is important. And I think for a local campaign, if you can find, it's easier said than done, obviously, but if you're on a local campaign, if you can find an 18, 19, 20-year-old, and I think the most important thing is you have to kind of make it cool. Like, young people are so attracted to the coolness factor, I think, of campaigns, right? That was what worked so well for Obama, worked well for Bernie, right? A lot of these local grassroots campaigns we see across the country, it's because they make it cool, And nobody wants to be the only young person on a campaign, right? So encourage them to get their friends involved. They can share your stuff on Instagram, whatever. It might not be a huge difference, but you can at least gain some organic traction that way. Have them bring their friends out to knock doors with them, right? And that's really where it happens, is by, I think it's all about relational organizing in terms of youth politics, especially. I think people often think that if you just, I'll even say this, I have like 20,000 Twitter followers, right? If I post my link to donate, I'll get like 1 or 2 donations, right? You have to ask people, right? And the same principle applies for donations, for volunteers, for campaign staff, right? You have to ask people to get involved sometimes, right? So if you're wanting to get an 18-year-old, don't just post about it in some, on Twitter expecting them to see. You have to ask the people you know. If you have, a friend who has a daughter that goes to the local high school, ask her. If they have a son that goes to the local college, ask him, right? You have to kind of build those relationships because you can't be passive about it, And from there, they can help reach out other people and bring other people in. Think of it like a very wholesome multi-level marketing scheme. Like, everybody just brings in more and more people as they goes out, right? Everybody brings in 3 or 4 people each, right? And that's the way it should be done. And that's the way a lot of the campaigns, I've seen them have the most success with it.
You have very successfully named our episode a very wholesome multi-level marketing campaign.
Don't say that. People are going to think my campaigns are
okay. I won't say it. I won't say it. A question for you about national politics. I noticed on Twitter that one of your Republican opponents was at the Capitol on January 6th. How do you deal with the fact that you are running, that you're running against somebody who was involved in a criminal conspiracy, a seditious conspiracy, really? But how do you talk about that? How do you get people to care? Or is that something that's just so national and so out of their minds that it doesn't matter so much? Because somebody like that isn't necessarily going to be as invested in the idea of democracy as...
I should actually clarify that on Twitter, because that candidate actually is running in a different district. And that's actually a perfect example of what I'm saying, is the fact that in that district, There's not a single Democratic opponent for that. And this is
Whoa.
Indianapolis, right? But yet, this Indianapolis
Wow.
City Council district does not have a
Nick,
Democratic opponent.
why don't we articulate for the listeners, what district is that? Who knows? Maybe we generate somebody who's willing to step up and could be a write-in candidate.
Yeah, so it's District 22, I believe, on the south side of Indianapolis. Okay. There's, again, a proud insurrectionist. She filed her candidacy. I asked somebody who it was. They said, oh, she's a crazy Republican. I went on her Facebook, and the first thing I saw was celebrating the insurrection 2 years later about how proud she was to be there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just beyond the pale, right?
Yeah.
But actually, my opponent too, even though she was not at the insurrection, she has close Trump ties. My opponent was working in Republican politics during the insurrection, right? So, it's not that far off, but it's, and this is the scary part of local politics is we see it all the time. Look at Diego Morales, the Secretary of State. People just don't realize, what is on the ballot, and people just go in there, and a lot of the Republicans, they vote the party line, and plenty of Democrats do it too, obviously. But there's some dangerously unqualified people that on the local level. And unfortunately, I think there's all these stopgaps along the way to stop these people. And a lot of them have kind of gone away. The local press, which, if this were 50 years ago, Diego Morales, his scandals would have been on the front page of every local press in the state, right? Because of just how crazy all of it was. But now it's hard to reach those people. And there's so much cynicism that people just assume, oh, I'm sure the Democrats are just bad too, right? But no, it's like,
no, Nick, we have to go out of our way to counter that, don't we? To get rid of that argument. Oh, they're both bad on the same. No, this is not. Democrats and Republicans are not equally bad. And I heard that a number of times at the door when I was knocking on the door. And I think it's really important that we dispel this. That Republicans are all about disruption and destroying democracy. Right? That's their game. Where Democrats, we want to serve people. We want to problem solve. We want to preserve our democracy. We want all people represented. And that is absolutely not what the other side wants. And I think it's just important that we continue, that we are constantly reminding people, Democrats are here to serve people. We actually are interested in helping each other. The other side is not.
Yep. And one issue that I think is I'm also incredibly passionate about too, and it's one of the reasons why having an insurrectionist on the council would be so dangerous, is because of the fact that, so we are the Indianapolis City County Council. We manage the city budget and the county budget, right? And we manage the clerk's office, and through that, the Marion County Election Board, right? So we manage the facilitation of the Marion County elections. And having people on there that are active opponents of American democracy and the American Constitution who are willing to go to Washington, D.C. and try to attack the very foundation of American democracy and America, it is so dangerous beyond belief. But it's happening all across the country, right? And again, I'll reemphasize, this is Indianapolis. Indianapolis is one of the few most democratic cities in the state, right? This should not be happening here. But there's a lot of these crazy people that have been vindicated all across the country that they just think that they have this, anointed, they can just go into and just cause havoc, chaos, whatever, right? If you don't get involved in local politics, you probably won't know this, but you have to just get involved. You have to make a difference. And this is why, being plugged into your local community is so important, because there's some, as much, again, I have optimism, but there's some dangerous people on local political level too, that we have to, fight against as much as we fight against the national ones.
Yeah, Nick, we've seen that already happening here in St. Joe County. We've elected people who do not have the requisite skill set to be in politics and to be an elected official. And they are moving very swiftly to dismantle key institutions right here in St. Joe County, public health being one of them. Our podcast, What the Gerrymander, right? So talking about gerrymandering and like what's happened in the state of Indiana, just making us more and more red. And then you couple that with voter apathy. So this idea that, oh, my vote doesn't matter concept, right? In St. Joe County, 22,000 Democrats, registered Democrats stayed home this past election cycle. How do you overcome that? Have you given this some thought about this gerrymandering business? Although I don't know that gerrymandering necessarily affects city council as much, but certainly voter apathy would affect your race as well. So I wonder if you could speak to the gerrymandering that exists here in Indiana, and then coupled with that voter apathy, how are we going to overcome this?
Yeah, and I think it's a great way of, circling back to the topics we were talking about before is, my district is, I would say 50-50, about 50%, I would say more of apartment areas that are a lot more very democratic, super democratic, that vote at a somewhat high level for presidential elections and stuff, 50%, whatever. Obviously, we'd like to get that number a lot higher, but it's a start. And then we have the really wealthy areas of my district that, I've lived in my entire life, so I have a lot of those ties, but are a lot more purple, but locally they turn out a lot higher, right? And they're a little more leaning red. But the problem is a lot of the apartments, the turnout is just abysmal. And the apartments in this area are pretty they're pretty middle class apartment as far as apartment goes in Indianapolis. But 15% turnout is not going to cut it, right? And all across the county, there's some precincts in Marion County that for a midterm election, not even a municipal election, at 5% turnout, right? Of registered voters, not even including the unregistered voters, right? So that's really, really tough. And ultimately, it's kind of this thing I said before about the who, when, where, why, how to vote, right? I think a lot of these people are just not really that political. They're not keeping up with the local political calendar about the deadlines, again, all the stuff, right? They don't know the candidates on their ballot. I think, again, we often overestimate the active kind of negligence of them not voting and just underestimate how much them they're just plugged out. Because as people that are plugged in, we live in a world where everybody's plugged in, but most people are just not very plugged in. They're not living in that world. So for me, it's kind of a lot about, for my race, but intentionally reach out to these people and kind of providing them with the information needed and not just relying on who has voted in previous elections. Because there might be people that haven't voted in previous elections but are still worth talking to, and they might still be interested in voting. But as a local political candidate, we can't turn everything into magic. Like, it'd be hard for us to get people that aren't even voting in presidential elections to vote in municipal elections. But we have to make sure we find those people that still want to vote, but maybe just don't know when the municipal elections are, and get them on our side. Because that's the reality. I'm sure it's the same in St. Joseph County. If every Democrat voted, that not even didn't vote at all, if all the Democrats that voted in presidential elections in St. Joseph County voted in municipal elections, Democrats would probably every single seat in the St. Joseph County, right? The same goes for Marion County. And it's easy to say those things in theory, but to actually accomplish them is extremely difficult. But we have to be just, on it. And, you have to realize that, in an area like mine, you have to have good turnout and persuasion to make it happen. And it's not just an either or equation you can work on. You have to make sure you have
And we can't underestimate the effect of active voter suppression. The other side is trying to make it as hard as possible for people to be informed, for people to register, they purge the rolls. There's a lot of active malevolence on the other side that also keeps people from being plugged in. And, for all the times that their vote didn't seem to make a difference, that just turns them off further. So,
it's tough.
Hey, so I wonder, Nick, maybe, with, the last couple of minutes that we have, maybe say a word or two about what your vision is so when you win city council, what would be your vision for Indianapolis?
Ultimately, the three issues I mentioned before are very important to me: infrastructure, public safety, and mental health. The fourth that I'll add on to is my district includes kind of two big areas of the city. Includes Castleton Square Mall, which is, I think, the biggest mall in all of Indiana, right? And it's got a lot of, it was built in the 60s or 70s, so it's aging a lot. It's got a lot of, growing pains, right? And then Geist Reservoir was also built in the, 50s. It's very wealthy, right? But there's a lot of issues in terms of sustainability and kind of the long-term growth. So what I think about most is I'm involved with a lot of these neighborhood groups, and I just want to be an active and strategic ally to think about these areas long-term and how to best be an advocate for them, right? And ultimately, that's where it happens, right? Is you have to have people that are just involved and have the vested interest and have the passion to make it happen. And, I've had a lot of, as I mentioned, great mentors, and not just local politics, but local community too, that have shown me how much you can really get done if you have a vision and make it happen. So for issues, those are really my, 4 big ones. If people want to reach out to me, my Twitter is Nick Roberts 317. I'm not hard to find. Just look up Nick Roberts. You'll find me anywhere. My donation link is on there too. Ultimately, that's the main thing right now, is just spending a lot of time getting the grassroots support. My opponent, as I mentioned, just moved to Indiana last year from DC. She's going to have tons of Republican money flowing into the race. My campaign is grassroots. We've had 600 people donate. Our most common donations are $10, $25, $50, right? So we really just got a ton of outpouring of community support, which has been a great kind of motivating factor, is the fact that we just had so much people that have been so good to us. But if you're interested, any amount really does help a lot. And I realize I'm kind of hypocritical on this, because I was just saying how indirect asks don't really do much, but still, if you want to help out, feel free to help out. I'm so appreciative of you guys, and thanks for, all the work you guys have done over the last, however long, to make Indiana a better place, because, every quarter, I'm very blessed to be in Indianapolis as far as politics goes. It's very different here compared to everything else, but I'm so thankful we have people all across the state fighting to make our state a better place.
Well, this has just been awesome. This conversation has been awesome. I think bringing in younger folks into the democratic process, into politics in Indiana, is absolutely the next way for us to go. We want to be able to turn the baton over, right? And You guys come in with a new playbook, and you teach us things about how to reach the Gen Z and how to increase voter engagement, because that's where it's at. Those are the folks who ended up staying home, and this is how we lost big in Indiana this last cycle. So I'm looking forward to watching your race and watching you win. And just as Stephanie said, we'll have to have you come back after that happens.
Yes, I'm also really looking forward to going to Notre Dame to speak to. That'll be so exciting. I always love speaking at all these different things. I love going to the elementary schools in the area, the colleges. Like, it's just so great to be in energy-filled rooms and just, share what I've learned, to other people in that way as well.
Oh, we'll definitely get you. We'll get you to come to Notre Dame, and we'll definitely get you on that speaker series for sure.
Well,
awesome. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time, Nick.
It was great to talk to you. I have like 15 more questions, but obviously we don't have the time to do that. So thank you for coming on. Yeah, I'll text them all to you, right? So in the show notes, we will put your donation link. And I think but I'll just remind people that we are trying to create an organization called Blue Indiana, which will crowdsource funding for state level candidates. But it's the same general idea. The more people you have running for office, not leaving seats uncontested and knocking on doors, the better off Indiana is. So thank you so much for your time. And I totally look forward to seeing what happens now and where you go, because I think you've got an amazing trajectory going.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Thanks,
a lot.
Nick.
Thank you.
Every episode after we talk to our guest, we'll have a few minutes where I share with you what's going on in Indiana and how it affects Hoosiers and their families, as well as other states where similar legislation is being enacted. It's god-awful that we have to talk about it, but there was another mass shooting in America, and this time it was close to home here in the Midwest. 3 people were killed at Michigan State University, and 5 people are in critical condition. I'm not going to describe what happened because the story details are gruesome and have become all too familiar. I gotta say, I am just sick to my stomach about this. Gun violence is preventable. Let's talk about how we got here for a moment. First, in America, we have normalized mass shootings. We hear about it, we react, we call for legislations, folks say things like, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, and then we move on and live our lives. The extremists, however, tend to double down on these tragedies and dismiss them as a mental health break, or they use the moment to say things like, don't take my guns. I actually had to unfriend a family member who said exactly that within 24 hours of Sandy Hook happening. It was stunning, and I couldn't believe that it had to be done. I value family and the lives of children. However, she demonstrated that she values her guns first. Second, this is in fact what the American people voted for. Whether you know it or not, when you cast a vote for MAGA extremists, you are casting a vote that is okay with mass shootings. Folks who support the extremists need to understand that the extremists want more guns and laws that allow just about anyone to purchase and carry a gun. It's all about creating a culture of fear. Third, when folks stay home and do not vote, this is what happens. A non-vote is, in fact, a vote for extremism. During this past election cycle, 22,000 registered Democrats stayed home and did not vote in St. Joseph County. This is a staggering number. 22,000 registered Democrats stayed home. Because we know that voting is the only way to stop what is happening, we must turn this around. Okay, so let's talk a moment about the conditions that allow for daily mass shootings. In Michigan, it is legal for a person to carry a firearm in public as long as the person is carrying the firearm with lawful intent and the firearm is not concealed. Per the Everytown website, Michigan ranks is number 24 in the country for gun law strength and does not have a recent track record of passing meaningful gun safety legislation. To bring this closer home, here in Indiana, just last year, again from the Everytown website, Indiana ranks number 30 in the country for gun law strength. And now listen closely to this. Indiana has the 16th highest rate of gun homicides in the country. And here's the shocking part, a rate that increased a shocking 93% over the past decade compared to a 73% increase nationwide. Folks, this is not okay. This is not okay. And while Indiana's gun homicides were increasing, how did the Republicans respond? Well, I'll tell you how. They passed a law that on July 1st of last year, a person is no longer required to obtain a handgun permit to legally carry, conceal, or transport a handgun within Indiana. It sounds unbelievable, I know, but it's true. Indiana's Republicans are more interested in increasing guns and gun violence in our state than trying to prevent it. So, my dear listeners, and listen closely, this cannot be our reality. We must all make a decision to engage in the politics. We cannot sit on the sidelines of our life and watch the Republicans dismantle our communities, create fear and insecurity, all the while taking away our individual freedoms. This is what this podcast is all about, rebuilding and reclaiming our political power. I know we can do this when we do it together. So let's get started. Share this podcast with 5 friends and family. Share what you learned today with 5 friends and family. Have a conversation and commit to voting every single year, period, full stop. Every year, automatically vote, because voting is how we would create the future that we all want. If after you have some conversations and want to share a story, please send us an email and we will try to share that story on this podcast. This is how we're going to rebuild our political power. Damn, I'm feeling fired up, and I hope that you are too. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our conversation with Nick Roberts today. Be sure to follow Nick and HVA on social media. Check the show notes for all the links. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Stay tuned for more information about upcoming guests. We have great stuff planned for you.
Next week, we'll feature a conversation between Heidi and Josh Lowry, who was an amazing candidate for state senate this last November. They'll be talking about what the Indiana state legislature is working on and telling you about the antics of the MAGA extremists so they're no longer unknown and we can all hold them accountable. Please send your questions for Heidi and Josh to WTG@HoosierVictoryAlliance.org. Also, as you know, we're working toward building a blue Indiana and ask that you make a small recurring donation at HoosierVictoryAlliance.org. If you like what you heard today, in the words of Gen Z, smash that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you, and democracy thanks you.